Welcome to Hollers and Hills, the podcast that takes you deep into the heart of East Tennessee's Great Smoky Mountains. The tourism hub welcomes millions of visitors a year, but it's also home to generations rooted in its Hollers and Hills. Join us as we uncover centuries-old rural communities, share rich history, and explore landmarks and attractions old and new. Meet the passionate craftsmen, entrepreneurs, and community leaders dedicated to preserving this beautiful region for future generations. Get ready to pack your bags and create your own mountain memories. Hollers and Hills is sponsored by Compass Ventures, a leading developer in Sevier County, helping to navigate your next trip to the Smokies. The Old Mill is more than a favorite stop in Pigeon Forge. It's been the town center since the early 1800s. This community literally grew around an iron forge in the Old Mill. To date, it's one of the oldest continually operating grist mills in the country, feeding 1.4 million people a year. Still family owned, the Old Mill welcomes guests and locals with biscuits, a boutique, a general store, pottery, views, and a taste of Appalachia. Hello and welcome to Hollers and Hills. I'm your host, Beth Haynes, alongside Sevier County developer and community leader Austin Williams, and we are thrilled to welcome Jimmy Proffitt to the podcast today. Jimmy is the historian and brand director of the Old Mill, and when he's not going viral on social media, he's spinning a Southern tale, usually with a cast iron in hand, right?
Pretty much with a cast iron in hand.
I was hoping you would bring us biscuits.
Oh, I should have. I'll bring some after.
Well, welcome to the Pines Theater.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
Thank
welcome
you so
to
much
the
for having me. I
podcast,
appreciate
Hollers
this.
and Hills.
Love it.
You like the name. You were saying on your social platforms, you reference hollers and some of your
Holler from the
content.
holler. Yeah. So I love that title.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, I know that you're familiar with the Pines Theater. You've been here for meetings, but you were telling me when you first came to this area, you worked for Dollywood on a show that was called Save the Pines?
Well, it was the Pines Theater, and it was called Let the Good Times Roll.
Okay.
And the premise of the show was that every episode or every show, we were going to save the Pines Theater. So yeah, it was a mystical theater, I guess, at that point, because this had not been redone. You know, what was this building back then? 25 years ago.
25 years ago, it was a thrift store for as long as I can remember. 25 years ago, I'm not for sure. It's had a lot of different uses, but
Yeah,
certainly not
so-
what
You
it is
didn't model
today.
it after a thrift store.
No, we didn't. No, so it was the old Pines Theater that Dolly had performed in, and it had fallen on hard times, and they were afraid that they were going to have to shut it down, and so we were just a bunch of teenagers. I was turning 30 that year. Bunch of teenagers getting together to save the Pines, and we put on a benefit show, and we raised enough funds every hour to save the Pines.
So we're here today because of that show.
Well,
You
I don't know
saved
if
the
it was.
Pines. Yeah.
I think Austin had more to do with that than I did, but.
Well, I think that the Old Mill, I mean, it's iconic. It's a landmark for people that love to come to Pigeon Forge. It's a must-see, a stop, but boy, has the footprint grown. We're going to talk more about kind of the current offerings of the Old Mill and also how it's branched off with the family-owned business. There's also a construction component that has been instrumental in building across the county. Also a distillery, so many different things to discuss. But I think to really appreciate the Old Mill, you have to talk about the history. You're from the Shenandoah Valley originally.
Originally, yeah.
And this community dates back to what, early 1800s, late 1700s?
Late 1700s, yeah.
Settlers came from the Shenandoah Valley?
They did, yeah. So the builders of the mill, 2 generations before the mill was built, it was John and Margaret Reese Lewis. They were teenagers. He was 16, she was 15. They met in Flintshire, Wales, got married, jumped on a ship, came to this new country, this new land. They settled, from what I can tell, close maybe to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Allegheny Mountains, and then that was 1730. By 1732, they were in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, and they settled there. They raised their 9 children. One of them was Mordecai Lewis. He was I think the youngest, and he served in the Revolutionary War in the Virginia militia. I don't know if he was alongside John Sevier, but he definitely would have known John Sevier because he was also from that area. John Sevier had a farm in Woodstock, Virginia, right in the heart of the Shenandoah Valley. And so after the Revolutionary War, he, along with John Sevier, made trips down here, and he settled here. And then the Iron Forge was built, and then the old mill was built, and it's been a part of East Tennessee history ever since.
Yeah, and the grist mill itself, it's housed many different things. I was reading just the history, especially with the Civil War.
Yeah, so the mill has always been more than just a mill. I mean, it's always been there to serve the community, as we do today. That's really the focus of what we do, is we serve the community. It's just a lot bigger now than it was back then. So, you know, the original builders of the mill, the Love family. So it was Mordecai Lewis's daughter married Isaac Love.
Okay.
Isaac built the Iron Forge in 1817, and then one of their sons, William, built the mill in 1830. And William became the first postmaster, also in 1842, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And that's where Pigeon Forge got its name, was right inside the mill. So they named it partially for the Iron Forge his father had started and was operating, and the pigeons that would roost in the trees there along the river. And the river, I think, had been named for the pigeons because then there was a species of pigeon that would fly over every fall into the winter on their southern migration, and it was a passenger pigeon, apparently a very large pigeon, and they would fly over by the hundreds of thousands at a time for weeks at a time, and they said it would literally darken the skies. Now, I can't imagine. I would not step outside my door the whole time that these pigeons were flying overhead. But apparently, those pigeons got them through some hard winters, not just here, but through the whole migration. And unfortunately, they're extinct.
Yeah, okay.
Because we as a collective community in that migration ate them into extinction. Yeah.
You don't serve those up at the
we
mill
do
today,
not serve those today. No, thankfully we don't.
But you mentioned the postmaster, so it was a post office.
So yeah, it was a post office.
Upstairs with a knitting loom during the Civil War for Union?
During the Civil War, the second owner, so they sold about 1848, 1849, and John Sevier Trotter bought it. And he was a unionist. So during the Civil War, he set up a secret knitting mill on the second floor of the mill. And you know, I don't know if people know a lot of the history of East Tennessee during the Civil War. It was very split between Northern and Southern support, very split. Brothers, cousins on both sides. And so anyway, he was a unionist, set up the secret knitting mill, and they made material and uniforms for Union soldiers that were encamped in Gatlinburg. Now, there were no actual skirmishes, battles in the Pigeon Forge area. I think from Knoxville maybe into Seymour, you know, getting close there. And the third floor was a makeshift hospital for wounded soldiers.
Any remnants from that Civil War era? Any spirits?
Well, we do hear things kind of bang and knock about every now and then. So yeah, there are rumors that there's ghosts in the mill. I've experienced a few things myself, so I can't deny that there's something going on there. Years ago, I used to give tours to new employees. And so it was usually in the afternoon. The miller, his day starts early and it ends by mid-afternoon usually, because it gets, in the summertime, it can get so hot in there. And so they come in early when it's cool and they cut out early. And so I'm taking a group of like 10 new employees over to the mill to do their part of their tour. And we say goodbye to the miller as he's leaving, and we go inside and I'm talking, and we hear footsteps on the floor above us, going from the front corner all the way to the back corner, just very distinct boot steps. And I said, well, I didn't think there was a soul in here, but maybe there is. Just very tongue-in-cheek, just being funny about it. And one of the women on the tour, brand new employee, knew nothing about the mill. She looks up as she hears the sound, and there are holes you'll see in the floors where belts and chutes and whatever have passed through the floor, and most have been patched up, but some of them, they're not really in the footpath, and so there's still a hole there in the floor. And she said, no, I just saw somebody walk by. So I was a little concerned because I thought we were the only ones in the building, but the store's open, so maybe somebody from the store went up. And so we do our little tour around the mill, and then we go up on the second floor. So I can see the stairs the entire time. And we go up on the second floor, and there is no one to be seen up there. but we heard them and she saw them. So
There you go.
yeah, there you go.
One question I had, I was curious, you mentioned when it was first built, how big was the mill?
So pretty much what you see is what was there in 1830. The only addition would have been the porch on the parking lot side, and then on the front side of the building, the little bump out over what's called the penstock. So where the water wheel is, there's an area that it would have been expanded about 8 feet to the building itself to cover that area, and the penstock is where the water flows through, passes through the turbines, and those turbines then move the gears and the belts that turn the stones.
Interesting. So I'm sure we've all seen the picture of Pigeon Forge in 1970 versus today, right? And all the changes happened in that 50-year span. I can't imagine, though, the difference between 1830 and even 1970. But was there any other buildings at that time, or was that the very first thing?
No, there were other buildings around it. So there's some pictures that we can date back to about 1900. We'd love to find. There's some that are possibly a little bit before that, but it's hard to date them exactly to know. So you can see where about 1920 the building that the distillery's in today was built. Behind that there was a barn. Across the street there was also another barn, which today is the pottery. So that barn, the building that the pottery first started in, was a 100-year-old tobacco barn that John Sevier Trotter built. So we know that that was part of his property there along with the mill. So he had his mill, and his sawmill that he started after the iron forge was dismantled, and he had his farm across the street.
So how many people live in Pigeon Forge at that point in time? Do y'all have any?
Oh gosh, I don't know, but I would say it was at best in the hundreds.
Yeah.
Low hundreds.
A little bit different than
Yes.
today?
Yeah, very different than today.
Very, and you talk about the landscape and how it's changed. Mother Nature wasn't so kind, right? A lot of flooding, even took the wheel.
It did. So, we'll see it flood at least twice a year now. A lot of times we'll have at least one in February. We'll get those winter storms, and we'll get some heavy rains, and we'll see some flooding, and the water will get up, and it may come out of its banks a little bit, and there are times that you won't even be able to tell where the dam is because the water level is so high it's covering all of that. But there are 2 floods that we are aware of that did a lot of damage. So the bridge that's there today, the very first one was built in 1857. It was a wooden covered bridge that John Sevier Trotter built from his sawmill. So all the wood, he provided that. So it was called Trotter's Ford at that time. And that was built in 1857. And I think in 1885, it was washed away in a flood. So the water wheel was taken off the building. More than likely, that's what took the bridge out at that point as it sails down the river. And they did not replace that wheel until 1919. So as I mentioned, there's the tub wheels that are underneath the mill. That's what operates the stones. The wheel out front really operates what's called grain elevators inside the mill. So it's carrying product from one floor to the next through a series of belts and pulleys. And so they can operate without that big wheel on the front, but that's what everybody associates with the mill. They're going to see that big breast wheel, and that's what they assume when it's turning if the mill is operating. So they replace it in 1919, and guess what happens in 1920? Another flood, and it takes the wheel off the building again, and it takes out the steel bridge that had replaced the wooden bridge. And so they rebuild with a concrete bridge, and in the 60s, I think that was expanded. So you may have seen pictures of like a one-lane bridge, even in the 60s, still crossing the river there. And they expanded that, and the wheel that's on there today was put on like around in the mid-1950s. So again, they went 30 more years without a water wheel on the building. And just operated with the tub wheels that are down below.
When it produced cornmeal and flour, but also electricity. How long did it provide
so
electricity
that
to
was
the
another
area?
business. It was the Pigeon Forge Power and Light Company from about 1920-ish to about 1932 when TVA was formed, and suddenly they're building dams all over East Tennessee, and the hydroelectric power, they were doing hydroelectric there at the old mill before all that started. And so in the mill today, you can still see some of the remnants of that. So there's parts of the old governor that would regulate that electricity. But they only produced. They didn't store electricity. So you only had electricity while the miller was grinding, while he was working. So if the wheel was turning, then he was producing electricity. And so I always kind of joke and say at the end of the day, they had to get out the oil lamps and fire up the cook stoves because his day was done and there was no more electricity. and there was never electricity on Sunday because he didn't work on Sunday, but
Yeah.
he worked 6 days a week. So, yeah, so that was another business there inside the
Yeah.
mill. So, a post office, a knitting mill, a hospital, and the electric company, and then, of course, after that, it became a tourist destination.
Fast forward now to present day, still family owned.
It is. It's always been privately owned, privately operated. We're the 7th owners of the mill. And I say we, I'm not a family member, but I've been with the mill for 27 years. So pretty much family,
like
I think, at
family.
this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's family owned and operated. There are 2 families that own everything. And there's a small percentage in the restaurant of another local family that's got some ownership there.
Let's talk about what all's there. It
So
continues to expand.
Yeah, so of course we have our grist mill and our general store. That's where everything began. And that was still under someone else's ownership when we built the restaurant in 1993. So when the restaurant opened, it was called the Cornflower Restaurant. And in 1995, the owners before us, who had it in their family for 2 generations, about 67 years, they decided it was time to sell, and they gave the Blantons and the Frizzels, the current owners, the option to buy. So they did, and they bought the mill and general store and renamed it the Old Mill Restaurant to tie all that in together. And then in 1999, when Douglas Ferguson, who started the first pottery in Pigeon Forge, when he passed away, his family, again, liked what we were already doing and the heritage and honoring what was there previously, gave us the option to purchase the building across the street. But we only purchased the building. We did not buy the business. They kept the business. So we did not recreate the Pigeon Forge pottery. We started Pigeon River Pottery.
Okay.
Because we had a building with kilns, and so it was just a kind of a natural fit. Let's go ahead and see if we can make pottery. I mean, literally 0 experience in making pottery. And so that's one thing that I found, that the families that own it are afraid of nothing. Absolutely nothing. They will start whatever, let's try it. Somebody else figured it out before, we can figure it out ourselves too.
And I love the Pottery Cafe. It's one of my favorite places to eat on property. But the food, it's great food, Southern food. It's served on the beautiful pottery that, as you said, is made on site and it's for sale. But I love that the cafe is in the potter's traditional home, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So he built that building, his home, in 1954. He started the pottery in 1946. So when he first operated his business there in that old tobacco barn, he wasn't living on property. But then in November of 57, that barn caught on fire and burned down. So by that time, he was living on property. He rebuilt and reopened by June of 58, and then kept the business going until he passed away in 1999. And that was the first tourist-based business in Pigeon Forge.
Wow.
So prior to him opening the pottery, there were a few things there along River Road. The parkway didn't exist. That was all fields. That was all farmland. And so when he opened that, he was a loner out there all by himself. And people even said, you know, that Ferguson, he's done gone and opened a business out in the middle of nowhere, is what they kind of felt.
Crazy to think about now. Yeah.
So Gatlinburg was already getting pretty busy. The national park was formed. President Roosevelt had already been here to dedicate the park, and so people heard about this new national park system, this Great Smoky Mountains National Park, but people were just driving right on by, you know. So he was really one of the forefathers, I think, of tourism for Pigeon Forge, absolutely. So we own and operate all the businesses through there ourselves on that side of the street. And then a couple of years later, we decided to open a second restaurant, and it was a home. So it made the perfect spot to really create that sense of family again. And so the main dining room is where his living room and dining room was. You know, that's the same fireplace that he would light for every family gathering. So all winter long, we have the fireplace lit, you know. And so lots of families come there and gather today, as they do in the Old Mill restaurant as well. How
did the other businesses evolve? You've got a candy kitchen, you've got the boutique.
So yeah, we opened a candy kitchen, and that's been going since, I think, 2001, somewhere in there. And a couple of the other businesses have changed. So the Farmhouse Kitchen started out as the Old Mill Gift and Basket Company. Sassafras, the boutique, started out as the potting shed. So we had like a garden element store, and we had The gift and basket had a lot of food in it, but the focus was really making gifts and things up there. But we found that people wanted to buy just the individual food products. So we're very, very aware of our history of 1830. So we're trying to be 1830 and stay true to that heritage, but also be 2025, 2026, 2030, 2050. What can we do that's going to last as long as what we have has lasted? You know, what will that be? What can we do next?
How many visitors do you guys get a year?
Well, we've always said the mill itself receives over 1 million visitors a year, but between the restaurants serving 1.4 million people, and then you've got people that just come to shop. I mean, we're I would say easily upwards of 1.68 million people a year.
And you can actually tour the mill today.
You can. So we do guided tours of the mill today still, and those used to be pretty seasonal, but we're keeping those going year round now. And our tour guide that we've got right now, Emmett, is such a character. He is amazing. I don't know if half of what he says is true, and I don't care, because he says it in such a way that he's so fun and just loves what he's doing.
Do you have like a food count each year?
Oh my gosh.
Biscuits, pancakes,
you know, if you
grits?
ask Tim Fulton, one of the managers at the Old Mill restaurant, he can probably tell you exactly how many fritters we serve a year, how many biscuits, how many pieces of country ham, how many, chicken legs. I mean, but it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Are these family recipes?
Some of them are. Yeah, some of them really are. The pecan pie recipe is a family recipe, not from the families that own, not the Blantons or the Frizzels, but Mo Tamadoni, that was a manager at the mill for years when he came on like 2 years after we opened. And he was there for 20-some years before he passed away. And that was his wife's recipe for pecan pie. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah.
It's a very good pecan pie. Yeah, I don't even want to count how many slices I've eaten over the years.
Over the years. Well, you talk about the current family, and it's not just the old mill, and Austin, you know this. They also have a construction arm. There's a distillery now. There's a whole lodging aspect. Tell us more about that, because if people come to the old mill, they're more familiar with this family than they think, especially if they spend any time in Pigeon Forge and Sevier County.
Right. So with the construction side, years ago, they were building cabins for other folks. And then, if you remember, the housing market took a bit of a turn there for a while, and they found themselves with some inventory on their hands. So like, what do we do with these buildings that the builders, the people that were wanting them to build it, couldn't complete? And so they said, well, let's finish this out and we'll rent them out. And so they started doing that. And it's not something that we do a whole lot of anymore. We still have a few. And there's a management company that they started with that. So they handle some of those things still. But it was really just, we've been presented with a situation, and how do we pivot and take care of this? So that's what they did with the lodging part of it. And then with the distillery, I think they were keeping their eye on what was happening, what was changing in the laws in Tennessee, keeping their ear to the ground. And when it was time, it just worked out that the building right there across from the mill, which was the Pigeon Forge Craft Center for like 40-some years. Prior to that, it was a tourist shop. But like I said, the history of that, it was built in 1920. It was a farm supply store when it first opened. Somewhere in between there, it was a coffin company. They made coffins. Oh. Yeah, in there.
Wow.
Talk about your spirits in the building.
Yeah, there you go.
And then for a while, the miller that worked for the family that owned the mill prior to us lived in it for a while. So there's always been, some connection there to the mill. And we've got all these grains. And what do you distill with? Grains. It was a natural fit. It was just sort of the next transition, the next thing that they could do. So all the grains for the distillery come right through the mill. So they use those. Some of it's a byproduct or a subproduct of what we're milling in there anyway. So when we're grinding corn into grits, they go into a machine on the second floor that separates the grit from the hull. And so the hull is kind of cast off on the side, and the powder that falls off that is called corn flour. And so they will take the hull and the corn flour, and they can use that to make moonshine. Yeah, so we're going to use every bit of that product. We're going to reduce the waste as much as possible. And what they don't take, we provide to local farmers. Now, the corn flour we can bag up. It goes into our mixes for breadings and things that we use. All of our meal products in both of the restaurants. So we're self-sufficient. You know, we're not just making plates that we're going to serve on. We're going to grind the flour that we're going to use to bake the bread that we're going to put on that plate to serve you on. You know, it's the level and depth of commitment that we go to provide a product. To some people would be a little crazy, you know, when you can just buy some of these things and use it. We go, no, we can do maybe a little bit more. We can do something better. We can do something that is uniquely us that nobody else can do.
I know, Austin, not only did you grow up around the old mill, you've actually worked with the family. They have Citadel Construction, right? So
That's
talk
right.
about that and kind of your relationship.
Yeah, you know, they're certainly business partners of ours to some extent. I mean, here in the Pines, Citadel was the contractor for the renovation of this. So they're working with us right now building an apartment complex that's a quarter of a mile from the old mill. So, you know, housing is a big issue. I mean, there's certainly a housing crisis for folks here in town. Nothing that's really affordable. Well, there's a 500 and something unit apartment complex right down the road that Citadel's in charge of building. But many of our projects here in downtown and throughout Sevier County, Citadel's our go-to. And so we've got great relationships with them, and that's just one of the many businesses that they've been a big part in. So.
And I love that. Families still working together to build this community, but also holding true not only to the heritage, but being committed to tourism. I mean, I know that drives this area and drives the foot traffic. It's also home to a lot of people, but that's just, it's so cool to see, you know, 200 years later that these families are still working together, you know. So
Right, to build the communities,
Yeah.
to support the community, to serve the community. And, you know, your family goes back quite a ways here, and their family does as well. Mrs. Blanton's father had a TV and radio shop just on Bruce Street, I think, here in town. So, you know, they've always been a part of this area. And so I think, just like you all, they're really committed to, like you said, honoring that history and keeping that heritage, but knowing that it's going to change. That
And you have to
you
evolve.
can't keep it from changing, and you don't want to. I mean, if you're not changing, you're stale and you're stagnant, and you're not going to be around long. So I think they recognize that those things are going to change. Okay, if it's going to happen, what can we do to make that change effective and make that positive and make it work?
Where do you see, you know, those principles and those things are always core, right? They stick around no matter what the business is or what the times look like. But where do you see the old mill going over the next 10, 20 years? What are ways that it expands? Are there things that you're all talking about now?
We have a footprint there in the middle of Pigeon Forge that is only so big. I mean, you know, we're at capacity at times. It feels like that the only place we can go is up. So, you know, what could we build next? I really don't know. What could we open next? The possibilities are endless, but it's really going to go back to serving the community. And what does that mean? Whether it's our local community or larger. I mean, now, like I said, in 1830, the community were the farms in the general area, but now it's people from all over the world. So what does that mean, and how can we serve those people?
because you're hoping to do cooking classes with children, teaching them.
So I've been teaching kids cooking classes for about 3 years now. And one of my goals there is to help teach kids where their food comes from and give them tools, literally, even if it's just a wooden spoon, tools that they can take with them to use. They're getting the recipes. I'm teaching them how to write a recipe, to log and keep these family records, because it's not just about what the old mill is doing, but what they're doing. So I want them to learn how to write a recipe so they can write those down and pass those on in their family. Because we get people all the time that say, oh, I came here with my grandparents, and now I'm bringing my kids. So we know that we're 5, 6 generations deep, even just the short period that we've been open, really, and when you think about that, that we can be that deep in experiences with these families that come to visit us. And we're as many as, I know I've had at least 4 generations of the same family working for us. So family is really at the core, too, of what we do and who we are. And so passing those traditions on and being a part of their families, just beyond the old mill, I think is fun.
And I know you've seen generations for years coming to the old mill, but now with social media, with your website, with that international footprint, are you seeing people come to Pigeon Forge from all over the world now?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've heard that for years. We even have workers from all over the world, you know, so it's amazing how many people we see coming through there, and just the variety of experiences and backgrounds that they bring with them.
Well, I tell you, next time we'll have to make some biscuits in the cast iron, or you'll have to share some recipes.
Yeah, we'll start a cooking show next. How's that?
That'd be great. That'd be great. Well, thanks for hanging out with us. Do you have anything else?
I don't think so. It's been really interesting to learn about the history and many things that I wasn't aware of.
Well, thanks
He's
for
a
having
local,
us.
so. We packed a lot into this episode: history, local flavor, and stops you need to visit. We have more stories and videos on our Hollers and Hills website, and we'd love for you to share your Smoky Mountain memory when you log on. And don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast: Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.